Sometimes a sentence finds you at the exact moment your life feels like it is coming apart. Not a grand revelation, just a quiet phrase that lands in your chest with the weight of recognition. Oh, this is what I'm living. You might be scrolling through your feed late at night or overhearing something in a cafe, and suddenly it feels less like you chose these words and more like they chose you. In Jungian language, this is a small act of synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence where outer events mirror an inner state, as if the unconscious itself has reached across the threshold and said, "Now, look here." Up until recently, your life may have looked normal, perhaps even enviable. There were friends to text back, routines that gave your days a structure, relationships that might not have been perfect, but at least were familiar. Jung would say that in this phase, your persona, the psychological mask you wear to adapt to the world, was doing its job. The persona is not a lie. It's a necessary interface, the social costume through which you move in family, work, and community. For a long time, that costume fit well enough. You knew who you were supposed to be. You knew what was expected of you. And then, almost without warning, hairline cracks began to appear in that carefully composed surface. A friend stopped returning your messages with their usual warmth. A relationship didn't explode. It simply thinned out into a dull, confusing silence. Gatherings that once felt cozy began to feel strangely hollow, like you were watching yourself from a distance, mouthing the right words, but feeling none of them land. It was as if someone somewhere backstage had quietly begun to dismantle the set of your life, removing props, dimming certain lights, ushering minor characters off stage, until you found yourself standing in a kind of emotional half-light, exposed and alone. From an everyday perspective, this looks like failure, rejection, abandonment. From a Jungian perspective, something far more radical is underway. What you are experiencing is the disruption of an old psychic equilibrium. The unconscious, that vast inner field of images, emotions, and potentials beyond your conscious control, has decided that the way you've been living is too small for the person you are becoming. Jung called the movement toward a more authentic, integrated life individuation, the lifelong process by which the ego, your conscious I, comes into right relationship with the deeper organizing center he named the self, the totality of who you are seen and unseen. Individuation rarely begins with a polite invitation. It begins with a rupture. Life stops cooperating with your old strategies. What once worked no longer does. In symbolic terms, you have entered what alchemy, which Jung used as a map of inner transformation, called the nigredo, the blackening. This is the phase where the old structures dissolve, where what is false, exhausted, or outgrown must be broken down. It feels like depression, but in depth psychology, we might call it a kind of holy decomposition. The personality you built to secure approval, to keep the peace, to not be abandoned, is being gently but relentlessly taken apart. You feel it not only in your circumstances, but in your body. Perhaps your sleep has become strange, either restless, fragmented, or heavy as stone. Maybe you notice an ache in your chest when you scroll through old conversations, or a subtle nausea when you think about returning to certain social scenes. There can be a numbness too, as if your feelings have been wrapped in cotton. Jung would say that libido, not merely sexual energy, but the broader psychic life force, is withdrawing from outer objects and old identifications. Where once you poured energy into pleasing others, maintaining appearances, earning love, now that energy is being recalled inward, into the darkness of the psyche to prepare for something new. On the surface, it seems like isolation. Your phone is quiet. Invitations slow down. You walk through familiar streets feeling strangely alien, as if the world has stepped one pace away from you. But under the surface, another process is unfolding. The self is beginning to clear the field to remove those relationships and routines that can no longer sustain the deeper life trying to emerge through you. This is not a moral judgment on anyone involved. It is a matter of resonance. The person you are becoming cannot fully incarnate in the old configuration of your life. You are standing at a threshold now, even if no one around you can see it. The old world has begun to fade, and the new world has not yet taken shape. It feels like loss because it is loss, the loss of an outdated self and the network that grew around her. But in Jungian terms, this is also initiation. The unconscious has issued its summons. The desert you are entering is not a punishment, it is a passage. The withdrawal you are experiencing is not merely circumstantial, it is archetypal. In every initiatory tradition, the one who is called must first step away from the familiar world, forced not by choice, but by an inner necessity that cannot be negotiated. Jung often described this moment as the beginning of the descent, the crossing from the conscious surface of life into the deeper layers of the unconscious. And although your descent is not marked by ceremonial drums or torches lining a temple path, its psychological reality is no less profound. It begins quietly, a Saturday night spent alone that feels strangely right, an impulse to delete conversations that weigh on your spirit, a sudden intolerance for noise, small talk, and performative connection. Something in you is withdrawing attention from the outer world and turning that energy inward. This inward turning, Jung teaches, is the psyche's instinctive preparation for transformation. You may notice dreams becoming more vivid, even unsettling. Images arise that feel foreign, ancient, or strangely symbolic. This is the language of the collective unconscious, the deep layer of the psyche shared by all human beings, where archetypes, primordial images, and patterns live. When your outer life becomes quiet, the unconscious finally has space to speak. A woman might dream of wandering through a ruined city or finding herself lost in a dense forest at dusk. These are symbolic landscapes of inner deconstruction. They show that you are leaving the surface structures of the persona and entering the raw terrain beneath. Another woman might dream of old lovers or childhood rooms, now abandoned dreams that carry the emotional residue of past selves. Dreams like these are not regression. They are the beginning of the psyche's sorting process, a kind of psychic composting in which old patterns, loyalties, and identities are broken down so that the vital essence within them can be reclaimed. This descent into the underworld is often accompanied by an emotional flattening, a sense that the things that once excited you no longer hold meaning. In Jungian terms, this is a withdrawal of libido from worn-out attachments. It can feel frightening, as if some essential spark has gone out. But in the analytic tradition, this is recognized as an essential stage. You cannot carry the old into the new. The psyche creates an inner emptiness to make room for something more aligned with your deeper truth. The emptiness is not a void, it is a womb. As your outer world contracts, you may also find yourself confronted by emotions you have spent years avoiding. Anger rises unexpectedly. Long-buried grief seeps up through the cracks. Desires you once disowned begin to flicker at the edges of your consciousness. This is the beginning of the shadow confrontation. The shadow is not the bad part of the personality. It is everything you had to exile in order to remain acceptable to your family, your culture, your partner, your younger self. Jung insisted that the shadow contains not only our fear and aggression, but also our vitality, ambition, erotic power, intuition, and unexpressed brilliance. In many women, the shadow contains a fierce authority that was discouraged early in life, a clarity that was never welcome, and a longing for a life that exceeds the confines of the persona. As the outer supports fall away, these shadow elements emerge not to torment you, but to be integrated. Jung taught that no individuation is possible without confronting and reclaiming the shadow. You may feel rage toward people you once protected, or sorrow for versions of yourself you neglected. These emotions are not regressions, they are revelations. They show you what you sacrificed to maintain relationships that could not bear the full truth of who you are. Now, with those relationships dissolving or drifting, the psyche is reclaiming the energy that was bound up in suppression. Alongside these personal layers, something deeper stirs the sense that you are not only living your own story, but also touching an older, more collective one. Many women in this descent feel the presence of what Jung would call the feminine lineage, ancestral patterns of silence, endurance, self-abandonment, or quiet strength that have traveled down through generations. Sometimes this lineage appears in dreams as unknown women standing at the edge of the scene watching. Sometimes it appears as a sudden recognition: I am ending a pattern my mother and grandmother never could. When this awareness arises, it often comes with a strange mix of grief and power. You begin to sense that your loneliness is not only yours, it is inherited. The silence you are walking through is the silence countless women before you were forced into. But unlike them, you are not being silenced. You are choosing solitude as a path of reclamation. This is where Jung's idea of transgenerational trauma touches the mystical. Through your transformation, something in the ancestral field begins to shift. You are not only healing yourself, you are breaking a chain. Yet this stage is not gentle. The old loyalties tug at your ankles. The fading relationships echo through your nights. The psyche tests your commitment to your emerging self by confronting you with memories, internalized voices, and habits that once felt like home. This is the liminal corridor where your past self dissolves, but the new self is not yet formed. You may feel suspended between worlds, no longer who you were, not yet who you will become. But this is the essential passage. In Jungian terms, you are beginning to differentiate your ego from the internalized demands of the father complex, the psychological imprint of authority approval, and the longing for validation. These structures must loosen if your psyche is to fully inhabit its sovereignty. And though you feel alone, you are not abandoned. You are being unmade so that you can be remade. At a certain point in this descent, the landscape shifts. The silence that once felt like abandonment begins to reveal its contours, its textures, its subtle intelligence. You start to sense that you are no longer merely losing the world. You are being drawn into a deeper conversation with yourself. And in this subterranean terrain, something long exiled begins to stir. Jung would say that the ego, stripped of its old identifications, finally has the space to encounter the deeper forces of the psyche. This is where the father complex often rises into view, not as a single memory or a specific person, but as an entire psychic architecture built around approval performance and the longing to be recognized. The father complex in Jungian understanding is not simply the relationship one has with an actual father. It includes the internalized image of authority, order, and worthiness that shapes how a woman learns to secure love. For many, it is the invisible engine behind people-pleasing, overachievement, self-minimization, or the magnetic pull toward partners who echo early dynamics. When your outer world quiets, this complex becomes unmistakable. You may suddenly see how much of your identity was constructed around being acceptable to others, how you trimmed your edges to be chosen, how you absorbed the silent message that love must be earned through compliance. As the father complex loosens, a disorienting freedom appears. Without that old authority figure, internal or external, dictating the terms of your existence, you face a more bewildering question. If I am not performing for approval, then who am I? What do I want? These questions do not arise politely. They erupt. They move through your body like heat, through your dreams like storms. This is the emergence of your eros, not in the narrow sexual sense, but as Jung defined it, the connective, creative, life-giving principle that fuels meaning and vitality. Eros is the soul's instinct toward relationship, not only with others, but with your own energy, your own imagination, your own depths. When Eros awakens, desires you once suppressed begin to surface. Desires for truth, for freedom, for a life that feels internally coherent rather than externally impressive. There may even be forbidden longings, impulses you once labeled as selfish or dangerous. These are not signs of moral decline. They are signs that your psyche is waking up. Jung believed that individuation requires the integration of eros, because without the life force, the personality becomes brittle, over-controlled, and cut off from its instinctual wisdom. The isolation you are living is making space for eros to return slowly, fiercely, unmistakably. As this inner fire grows, it begins to illuminate the architecture of your past. You may suddenly recall childhood scenes with a clarity that feels almost cinematic. You see the ways you learned to shrink to stay quiet, to anticipate others' needs before your own. In these moments, the descent becomes an act of witnessing. You are not merely revisiting your past, you are reclaiming the self that was left behind within it. What emerges is not resentment, but a profound tenderness for the child. You once were the girl who had to become so adaptable, so compliant, so alert to the emotional weather of others. This tenderness is a turning point. It signals that your relationship with yourself is shifting from judgment to compassion. And in depth psychology, this shift is a clear sign of the self, the organizing center of the psyche, moving into greater proximity with the ego. The self does not shout, it does not command. Its presence feels like a quiet, steady warmth, a sense that something larger than your conscious mind is holding you through the unraveling. With this presence comes a recognition the loneliness you feel is not merely personal, it is archetypal. The myths of descent, Inanna into the underworld, Persephone into Hades, Psyche into her forbidden tasks, each describe a woman stripped of her symbols of power so she can encounter a deeper authority within herself. You are living this myth not metaphorically, but psychically. The stripping is real. The emptiness is real. But so is the transformation taking root beneath it. And now, something unexpected begins to happen. The desperation that once clung to your solitude starts to loosen. The anxiety of being unseen softens. You begin to feel a subtle but unmistakable shift. The experience of being alone no longer feels like punishment. It begins to feel like truth, like a necessary clearing in which something sacred can unfold. In this moment, the ego is no longer the frantic manager of your life. It becomes the apprentice of the self. And from this apprenticeship, a new kind of inner posture emerges, upright, grounded, quietly powerful. As the psyche settles into this new inner posture, the descent takes on a different tone. What once felt like disintegration begins to feel like revelation. The silence around you, which earlier pressed in like a suffocating fog, now expands into a spaciousness where subtle perceptions become possible. This is the moment in Jungian work when the ego, having relinquished its defensive rigidity, becomes receptive to the deeper currents of the collective unconscious. You may sense it as sudden intuitions, strange clarity, or a quiet blooming of insight that does not feel thought so much as remembered. This phase is not dramatic, it is not explosive. It is slow, steady, and almost imperceptible, like dawn light gradually overtaking the night. There is a softening and attunement, a shift in the internal gravitational field. You begin to recognize that much of what you once called loneliness is actually an absence of noise that once drowned out your own voice. Now, in the spaciousness of withdrawal, your voice returns. At first, it is faint like a whisper you can barely hear, but as you listen, it strengthens. What emerges is not the brittle voice of the persona rehearsed for an audience, but a more ancient voice, the voice of the inner feminine, the archetypal principle of intuition, embodiment, and inner knowing. For many women, this is the first time they have heard themselves without distortion, the first time their desires feel legitimate, their instincts trustworthy. Jung believed that when the inner feminine awakens in a woman's psyche, it brings the capacity to relate to oneself, to hold one's inner world with care, curiosity, and devotion. This awakening is often accompanied by a new kind of solitude, not the aching solitude you once feared, but what could be called psychological aloneness, a sovereign state where you are no longer seeking your reflection in others. This is also the point where the old relational patterns fall away with greater finality. You notice you can no longer pretend. Connections built on rescuing, performing, or emotional caretaking dissolve because you no longer have the psychic energy to sustain them. What once felt like betrayal now feels like truth. You begin to sense that trying to remain in those dynamics would be a betrayal of your own unfolding. And yet this clarity does not arise without complexity. You may feel guilt for pulling away from people who once depended on your compliance. You may feel fear as you realize that the relationships that remain are fewer, quieter, more spacious than before. But as the self comes into alignment, another perception crystallizes. It is better to be alone than to be half present in a life that no longer fits your soul. The psyche rejects the counterfeit in order to make room for the authentic. And authenticity, Jung insisted, is the lifeblood of individuation. In the midst of this clarity, you may also feel a strange restlessness, not anxiety, but creative tension. Jung called this the activation of the lifeblood of the psyche, the reawakening of libido in its broadest sense. Ideas begin to stir. Long-buried creative impulses rise like animals emerging from a forest after a long winter. You might feel drawn to write, paint, move your body, wander unfamiliar streets, or simply sit in stillness for long stretches without justification. This is Eros beginning to move through you again, no longer tied to the need for validation, but liberated as a force of vitality, imagination, and inner coherence. And as Eros returns, something extraordinary happens. You begin to feel yourself not as an abandoned figure wandering an emotional desert, but as someone standing at the center of a growing internal kingdom. The emotional scaffolding of your life no longer depends on outer figures. There's a new architecture rising from within, constructed of clarity, boundaries, instinct, and a tenderness toward your own complexity that once felt impossible. At this point, the loneliness changes flavor. It no longer burns, it breathes, it becomes air. Instead of craving someone to complete you, you begin to sense that you are already standing in your own fullness. And from this fullness, the psyche undergoes a profound shift. The frequency you emit is no longer one of longing, but of presence. And presence in Jungian terms is the most magnetic force of all. As this inner architecture solidifies, something almost imperceptible begins to change in the field around you. You no longer reach outward with the same desperation. Your psyche, once stretched thin by the demands of old identifications, begins to gather itself inward, forming a center of gravity that feels unmistakably your own. Jung described this as the ego coming into alignment with the self, a process that brings with it an unmistakable sense of inner rightness. There is no fanfare, no triumphant crescendo. It feels more like a quiet, settling a deep exhale you didn't realize you were holding. In this state, you begin to experience sovereignty not as rebellion, not as defiance, but as a natural extension of who you are becoming. Sovereignty is simply the recognition that your life belongs to you. It is the moment when the emotional umbilical cords connecting you to old sources of validation gently fall away. When you realize you no longer owe anyone the version of yourself that once kept them comfortable. When you can sit in your own presence, wholly, tenderly, unapologetically, without the reflexive urge to perform or justify. This sovereignty, however, is not a lonely fortress. It is a spacious plateau of consciousness that allows you to encounter others without collapsing into them. You can feel the emotions of another without absorbing them. You can witness their expectations without bending to them. You can love without losing yourself. Jung believed that this capacity to remain oneself while in connection with another is one of the clearest signs of psychological maturity. And it is only from this altitude that true relationship becomes possible. But before relationship comes, something else must happen. The psyche tests its newfound independence. It brings you face to face with situations that once would have shattered you, and you notice sometimes with disbelief that they no longer penetrate your center. A delayed text that once triggered anxiety now registers as neutral. A familiar criticism that once hooked your insecurities now sounds like an echo from a previous lifetime. Even the prospect of remaining alone no longer carries the sting it once did. Instead, it feels like a spacious possibility, rich, open, alive. This is not numbness, it is clarity. It is the self asserting its quiet authority over the ego, whispering, "You are already whole." Nothing can add to or subtract from that. And in this wholeness, something begins to radiate from you, a subtle magnetism that does not announce itself, but is unmistakably felt. Eros, having returned to its rightful home within you, now emanates outward not as longing, but as presence. It is this presence, not beauty, not charm, not a curated persona, that draws others toward you. You may begin to notice it in small ways. Strangers linger in conversation. People look at you with curiosity, sensing a depth they cannot name. Interactions feel less strained. You no longer chase connection. Connection comes to you. And yet you are not easily swayed. You feel into the quality of each encounter, sensing whether it vibrates at the level of your new interior reality or echoes the patterns you have outgrown. This discernment feels instinctual, effortless, as if your psyche itself has become a tuning fork calibrated to your own truth. It is here in this emergence that the possibility of love returns, not as a frantic search, not as a compensatory fantasy, but as a quiet readiness. You do not need another. You do not ache for another. You simply stand in a fullness that creates space for another should they appear. This is the paradox at the heart of individuation. Only when the ego stops seeking completion from the outside can the self allow authentic relationship to enter. If someone arrives in your life at this stage, you will recognize them not by the fireworks of infatuation, but by the resonance of familiarity. A sense of, oh, there you are. Not relief, but recognition. The feeling that this meeting is not the beginning of something new, but the continuation of something ancient. And yet Jung reminds us individuation is not a guarantee of partnership. It is a guarantee of readiness. You cannot force the timing. You can only hold the space within yourself. You can only become the one who can sustain the kind of love your soul has been unconsciously preparing for. But even if no partner arrives, the transformation itself is the gift. The desert you walked through was never about another person. It was about returning to the core of who you are. It was about reclaiming the parts of you scattered across years of pleasing, performing, and surviving. It was about becoming the woman who is no longer afraid of her own depths. And now, standing in this new and quiet expanse, you begin to understand the deeper truth. The greatest love you were seeking was not waiting in another's arms. It was waiting in your own. This is the homecoming. This is the integration. This is the point at which the journey inward becomes the foundation for everything outward. The self is a home you build from the fragments of every moment you chose yourself. If you wish to continue exploring Jungian depth, psychology, feminine consciousness, and the inner landscapes of individuation, you're invited to subscribe, share your reflections, and join this unfolding conversation. Your voice, your journey, and your insight enrich the field we explore together.